They almost took my baby from my arms while I was still bleeding from bringing him into this world. I did not know it in that moment. Not fully. All I knew was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears and the weight of my son on my chest, warm and impossibly small, breathing in short, uneven puffs that smelled like milk and antiseptic, and something too pure for a place like that. The room felt washed in gray. The fluorescent light above hummed softly. The monitor beside my bed ticked out my heartbeats with indifferent beeps, and the air held that sharp hospital smell of alcohol wipes and overboiled coffee drifting in from the nurse's station. I remember the rocking chair first. It sat in the corner of the room, its old wooden frame creaking every time my mother-in-law shifted her weight. Back and forth, the rhythm of the chair sounding almost like a lullaby that did not belong to me. My son lay against my chest, his cheek pressed into the thin fabric of my hospital gown. His tiny fingers curled against my skin, and every twitch of his hand felt like a promise I did not yet know how to keep. My body ached in places I had never thought about before, a deep raw ache that pulsed through my bones and muscles with every breath. I heard her voice before I saw her face. She stood near the window, the curtain cracked just enough to let in a sliver of pale morning light. That faint strip of brightness fell across the white tile floor and touched the toe of her sensible shoe. She spoke into her phone in a tone that was low and careful, the tone she reserved for doctors and bankers and anyone she wanted to impress. My head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton and pain medication. So at first her words came through like muffled sounds in the next room. Then single words began to sharpen themselves against the fog. Custody, stability, concerns. The syllables felt wrong in the air of that room. I had just pushed life into the world. My skin was still damp with effort and fear. My son had only just learned how to breathe. Those words did not belong here. Not with us. I shifted on the bed, trying to ease the pressure along my stitched skin. The movement sent a bolt of pain shooting through my abdomen, and I sucked in a breath. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at me over her shoulder, and then she stepped closer to the window, pressing the phone nearer to her mouth. Her voice dropped lower. I told myself she was arguing with an insurance company, or speaking to a nurse about follow-up instructions, or arranging some sort of leave for my husband. That was the kind of woman she was. Always handling things, always stepping forward when others hesitated. I tried to believe that. The nurse came in with a gentle smile and brisk hands. She checked the monitor, adjusted the drip, and asked about my pain on a scale that felt meaningless now. My mother-in-law slipped her phone into her purse with a smooth, practiced motion and walked back to the bed, her face arranged into a mask of soft concern. She brushed hair away from my clammy forehead and told me I had done well. She told me to rest. She told me she was here to help, that I would not have to worry about anything. Her eyes never left my son. I closed my own eyes to escape the intensity of her gaze, and pressed my lips to the downy hair on his head. Something inside me stirred then, a tiny prickle of unease that did not yet have a name. Later, I would trace everything back to that moment, to the creak of the rocking chair, to the careful whisper by the window, to the way the word custody did not sound like a stranger's mistake at all, but like the first drop of rain before a storm. Before the pregnancy, my life was small in the way that feels safe. My husband and I lived in a cramped apartment that always smelled faintly of coffee grounds, laundry detergent, and the fried garlic drifting out from the neighbor's kitchen. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and when the wind was strong enough, the windows rattled as though the building were shivering along with us. We had a sagging couch with one armrest that dipped lower than the other and a chipped dining table that wobbled if you leaned on it with too much enthusiasm. There were mismatched mugs in the cupboard and plants on the windowsill whose leaves were more dust than green. It was not much, but it was ours, and we had memorized every inch. In the early mornings, I would walk to the bakery where I worked, the air still dark and damp with remnants of the night. Inside, the ovens glowed and the smell of yeast and sugar wrapped itself around me like a familiar embrace. Those quiet hours before the first customer walked in belonged to me. The clatter of trays, the puff of flour rising when dough met the counter, the soft hiss of steam when fresh loaves emerged golden and crisp. All of it made sense. My husband worked longer hours and harder jobs, construction mostly. He came home smelling of dust, sweat, and the faint metallic scent of rebar and tools. His shoulders carried the weight of his day. But when he walked through the door and saw me, something in his posture always softened. At night, when he wrapped his arms around me, I felt like there was still a place in this world where I could rest. His mother lived across town in a house that carried the stale sweetness of old perfume, jasmine incense, and mothballs. The curtains were always partially drawn as if she were unsure whether to let the world in or keep it out. Her jewelry sat in small velvet boxes, each piece wiped and polished whenever she felt anxious. The pictures on her walls were mostly of him at different ages, frozen moments of childhood and adolescence that she treated like sacred relics. She had lost her husband years before I came into the picture. After that, all the light in her world seemed to narrow down to the outline of their only son. At first, I thought her attention was endearing. She called him daily, sometimes more, asking about his meals, his work, his sleep, his mood. She told me that I was the daughter she never had and said it often with a hand pressed over her heart and a little tremble in her voice. I believed her. Or I wanted to. My own mother lived far away, in a town I could not reach without long rides and careful planning. I missed the sound of her slippers on the tiled floor, her humming in the kitchen. Phone calls were never quite the same as being held. So when his mother started inviting me over for tea, sending containers of soup with him, and asking about my day, it felt like a piece of something I had been missing. But even in those early days, there was something in the way she watched me. Her observations came wrapped in smiles, but they were sharp enough to make little cuts. If I added extra salt to a dish, she would laugh softly and say that her son preferred less. If I wore a new dress, she would tilt her head and murmur that a different color might flatter me more. It was never overt criticism, just layers of gentle correction, as if she were editing me slowly into a version she approved of. When we told her about the pregnancy, her eyes filled with tears so quickly it startled me. She clutched my hands with a grip that felt too tight, her fingers cold and trembling. She said this child would be her joy, her second chance, her light. I smiled back and allowed myself to be pulled into her excitement. We went to appointments together when my husband could not take time off. She insisted on sitting beside me in the waiting room, holding my bag, asking the nurse questions before I knew what to ask. At each visit, she introduced herself as a second mother, a phrase that made the nurses smile and made me feel both comforted and slightly displaced in my own story. At home, she began to appear more often. She brought blankets and tiny clothes in soft fabrics, stacking them neatly on the couch. A wooden crib arrived one afternoon, delivered to our door with no warning. Its pale slats smelled of fresh varnish as my husband and I assembled it in our bedroom, while she watched from the doorway with an expression that mixed satisfaction and nostalgia. Our apartment slowly transformed into a space centered around someone who had not yet arrived. Bottles lined the kitchen counter, sterilized and arranged by her careful hands. Pacifiers and small toys appeared in bowls and baskets. A mobile that played a tinny lullaby hung above the crib, spinning slowly whenever someone brushed against it. She said she wanted everything to be perfect when the baby came. She said she did not want me to worry about a thing. I told myself this was love, that this was support, that this was what family was meant to look like. Some nights, after she left and the apartment finally fell quiet, I would sit on the edge of the bed with my hands on my belly and feel my son shift beneath my skin. The air carried the faint smell of baby powder and new fabric. My husband snored softly in the next room, exhausted from work. I would listen to that sound and try to imagine the life waiting for us. I saw myself as a mother learning slowly. I saw us stumbling through sleepless nights together. I saw his mother teaching me recipes and singing the baby to sleep when my arms were too tired to go on. What I did not see, what I could not yet even imagine, was that she was also quietly building something else. Not a nursery, not a support system, a case. The first hint of unease came quietly, the way a cold draft slips under a door where you least expect it. It did not shout. It did not demand attention. It simply settled into the corners of my awareness, light as dust, easy to brush aside if I tried hard enough. In the earliest days after coming home from the hospital, I was drifting between exhaustion and tenderness, those fragile newborn hours, when time loses its edges. I held my son close through long nights, breathing in the warm milk scent of his skin, feeling his tiny fists curl and uncurl against my chest as if he were learning the shape of the world through touch alone. My mother-in-law came by so often in those first days that her presence became another piece of the background, like the creak of the hallway floorboards or the hum of the refrigerator. She walked in with the confidence of someone who believed the space belonged to her as much as it did to me. Her purse always landed in the same corner, her shoes aligned neatly beside the door. She moved through the rooms with a familiarity she never had to earn. At first, I told myself this was kindness, that she cared, that she wanted to help. But help did not feel the way her presence felt. The first strange moment happened during a quiet afternoon when the air was thick with the smell of soup heating on the stove. My husband had returned to work by then, leaving me alone with our newborn's soft cries and the unpredictable waves of postpartum emotions. She came in carrying groceries, humming to herself as though she lived there. I was heating the soup when she approached me with a soft smile that did not reach her eyes. She reached for the ladle in my hand and took it gently, her fingers brushing mine as though she were rescuing me from something dangerous. "You look tired, dear," she said in a tone that sank under my skin. "Why do you not sit? I can take over." The words seemed harmless on their surface, floating in a soft cloud of concern, yet they held an implication beneath them. That I was not capable, that she saw something fragile and uncertain in me that required her constant intervention. I stepped aside, the ladle taken from me like a small failure, and watched her stir the pot. Something in her posture made my stomach tighten. She looked content, almost serene, as if she had regained a position she believed had been stolen from her. When the baby cried from the other room, she was the first to reach him. Her movements were swift and practiced, her arms lifting him with an ease that felt rehearsed. She rocked him gently, humming that soft lullaby again. I stood there, feeling an ache bloom behind my sternum, an ache I could not name yet. "He calms for me," she murmured, almost to herself. "He knows who feels steady." For a moment, a thin thread of something sharp flickered through me, but I pushed it away. I blamed exhaustion. I blamed hormones. I blamed the fog of recovery. Later that evening, after she finally left and the apartment settled into its familiar silence, I replayed the moment in my mind. How quickly she had taken the child from my arms. The way she watched me when I stumbled with the buttons on his onesie. How she would tilt her head and observe me as though noting something for later. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. That she was simply adjusting to becoming a grandmother. That she meant well. But the next clue came only a day later. I noticed small changes in the apartment after her visits. Bottles rearranged. A blanket folded differently. The baby's clothes moved from one drawer to another. At first glance, all of it looked like tidying, but gradually I realized something else was happening. She was reorganizing everything into the way she believed it should be. Her system, her preferences, her choices, replacing mine, quietly, almost invisibly. It was midday when I saw her unlocking the door with the spare key she insisted we keep for emergencies. I stood frozen in the hallway, the baby cradled against me, as she stepped inside, brushing past me with the soft scent of jasmine trailing behind her. She greeted me warmly and reached immediately for the baby. I hesitated a moment too long. Her smile faltered. Then she reached anyway. Her arms closed around him in a possessive curve, her cheek brushing his forehead with a tenderness that felt edged. She asked if I had slept. She asked if I felt overwhelmed. She asked whether I was eating enough. Every question seemed innocent, but every question was also a suggestion, a quiet planting of doubt that felt deliberate. When she handed him back, her fingers lingered on my wrist, cool and light. She studied my face with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Motherhood is hard," she said softly. "Sometimes too hard for some women." I nodded because my throat was too tight to speak. That night, when the baby slept on my chest and my husband breathed softly beside us, I stared into the dimness of our bedroom and let the unease settle more firmly. Something was shifting inside her, or perhaps something had always been there, waiting for the right moment to wake. The final spark of suspicion arrived a few mornings later. I was half asleep in the living room, the baby dozing on my shoulder, when I heard her voice drifting from the kitchen. She was on the phone. She spoke in that careful tone again, low and measured. I moved silently closer, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. I could not make out many words, only fragments. Stress, postpartum, concerns, better environment. Each word was like a cold bead sliding down my spine. She ended the call quickly when she heard me in the doorway. Her smile snapped into place, too bright, too swift, too prepared. She took the baby from my arms without asking and kissed his forehead. "You need rest," she said gently. "Let me help." Her words fluttered around me like feathers, soft but suffocating. That was the moment I knew. Not the whole truth. Not yet. But enough. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And whatever she was building it quietly around me. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in quiet pieces, falling into place one by one until the shape of something devastating finally revealed itself. It began with a message. The baby had just fallen asleep that afternoon, his small breaths warm against my collarbone. I eased him into the crib and moved to the living room to fold the laundry that had piled up over the week. A gentle beam of sunlight slanted across the floor, touching the soft edge of a baby blanket and warming my feet. My phone buzzed on the table. When I picked it up, the screen displayed a number I did not recognize. The message beneath it was short, polite, and terrifying in its simplicity. It asked me to confirm an appointment for a consultation. A consultation with a law office. For a long moment, my body did not move. My breath stayed trapped somewhere between my ribs and my throat, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the message, trying to make it align with something harmless. But it refused. My first thought was that they had the wrong number. My second was that my husband had arranged something without telling me. But beneath those excuses, where truth lived quietly, something darker pulsed. Custody. Unstable. Concerns. Words I had heard before. I slowly set the phone down, but the air around me had already changed. The room felt heavy, the silence too thick. Every shadow seemed suddenly important. Every sound too sharp. Later that evening, when my husband returned home, I almost told him. The words even reached my lips. But when he asked how my day was, tired and hopeful, something inside me clamped shut. I did not know what his mother had already told him. I did not know what seed she had been planting. I did not know if he would believe me or believe her, so I stayed silent and swallowed my fear. The next morning, the truth stepped closer. The baby cried early, before dawn. I held him in the rocking chair, the room lit only by the weak glow from the hallway. As he fed, the doorbell rang. My heart lurched. No one rang our bell that early. Except her. I moved to the door slowly, careful not to wake the baby. Through the peephole I saw her standing there, dressed neatly despite the early hour, a soft smile waiting on her lips. I did not open the door. She called my name gently. When I did not answer, she sighed and left. I waited until her footsteps disappeared down the hallway before I finally breathed again. Later that day, while the baby napped, I noticed something sticking out from beneath the coffee table. Just a corner of a white envelope, barely visible. At first, I thought it was a bill we had dropped, but when I pulled it out, the envelope was unmarked, sealed lightly. The flap pressed down but not glued. My lungs tightened. Inside were several printed pages. I unfolded the first sheet. Concerns regarding maternal capability. The room spun for a moment. My fingers turned cold. I scanned the page, the black ink blurring slightly as my eyes raced over the words. Inconsistent emotional stability. Possible environment risk factors. Recommendations for follow-up. Guardianship options. Each phrase hit like a blow. Each line made the floor tilt beneath my feet. Then I saw it. Pages with highlighted sections. Notes in the margins. Circled concerns. A case file. A documented inquiry. Not speculation. Not a misunderstanding. A woman had brought concerns to a law office. A woman had begun preparing evidence. A woman had requested information about guardianship. A concerned family member. I sank onto the couch, the papers trembling violently in my hands. My breath came fast. In sharp little gasps I could not control. I closed my eyes, trying to steady the baby, sleeping in the other room with my silence. She had done this. She had started it already, and she had left the papers in my home. Whether by accident or bold confidence, I could not tell. But the truth was here now, lying across my lap in black and white. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Someone paused outside the door. Then a soft knock. Her voice drifted through the wood, warm and perfectly measured. "Are you home, dear?" The papers in my hands shook harder. My pulse hammered in my ears. My baby let out a tiny sound from the bedroom, and I pressed my palm to my chest to keep from crying out. She continued speaking. "You seem overwhelmed. I can help. Let me help before things get out of hand." Out of hand. A phrase chosen carefully. A phrase she could repeat to the lawyer. A phrase she could use to describe me. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe loudly, not to answer. After a moment, she sighed softly. Then I heard her walking away. I waited a full minute before my knees unlocked enough for me to rise. The betrayal was no longer a possibility. It was written, outlined, documented, prepared, and it was aimed directly at my child. That night, when the apartment settled into its familiar dark, when my husband slept and the baby breathed his tiny breaths against my chest, I thought I might break. But I did not break. I hardened. I whispered into the soft darkness, my voice low and steady. She is trying to take him. And now I know. The night after discovering the documents, the apartment felt different. Not smaller, not darker, but watchful. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath with me. I sat on the couch while my baby slept on my chest, his tiny breaths brushing the skin beneath my collarbone, steady and soft. That softness steadied me. It reminded me why I could not afford to fall apart. I needed to act, quietly, carefully, deliberately. The first thing I did was gather everything. Every document, every printed page, every subtle note she had left behind. I spread them out across the wooden coffee table, each sheet catching the faint light of the night lamp beside me. I took pictures of every page, making sure the ink was clear and the markings visible. Then I placed the originals into a folder and hid it beneath the blankets in the linen closet somewhere she would never think to look. Somewhere even I barely touched. Next, I opened my old notebook from pregnancy and turned to a clean page. My hands still trembled slightly, but I forced them to steady as I began writing. Dates she entered the apartment without asking. Times she took the baby from my arms uninvited. Comments she made about my state of mind. Questions that were less curiosity and more surveillance. The phone call in the hospital. The envelope. The lawyer's message. The meeting she scheduled. Every detail that had unsettled me but seemed small at the time now formed a map. A pattern. A story she was crafting that did not belong to me, yet had been written around my life. When my husband came home the next evening, I watched him with new eyes. Not with suspicion of him, but with suspicion of the influence that had been shaping his understanding of me. I cooked dinner slowly, deliberately, listening to every shift in his tone. He asked if I was tired again. He asked if the baby was keeping me up. He asked if I needed more help. Help. The word tasted bitter now. I told him I appreciated him. I told him I was adjusting. He smiled gently, unaware of the storm swirling beneath the calm surface of the room. I wanted to reach for him, but the truth between us had become uneven. I needed to understand how deep his mother's influence stretched before I opened that door. The turning point arrived the next morning. I had finally fallen asleep for a short while when the jingle of the front door handle jolted me awake. The baby lay in the bassinet beside the couch, his lips twitching in a dream. My heart thudded against my ribs as I rose quietly and approached the door. The lock held firm, but someone was trying to open it. The handle turned again. Then her voice slipped through the thin wood. "It is me. Dear. You did not answer my calls. I only want to make sure the baby is all right." My pulse hammered. I stayed still, silent. She waited for my response. When none came, her voice softened into that trembling concern she used whenever she wanted to seem saintly. "I am worried about you. Everyone is. You know I am only trying to help." Everyone. A word chosen carefully. A word that created witnesses she had likely spoken to already. When I still did not respond, she tried again. "Let me take him for a little while. You need rest. You are not yourself." Not yourself. The exact phrase one might use when building a case. I forced my breath to stay silent as I pressed my back against the wall beside the door. The baby still sleeping soundly behind me. Eventually, she sighed. A long, disappointed sigh. Then she added the words that sealed my next move. "If this continues, someone will have to step in." Then she walked away. I did not move until the hallway fell completely silent. That afternoon, I called the law office myself. The woman who answered sounded hesitant, as though she already knew my name. I asked calmly why they had contacted me. She explained that a family member had come in expressing concerns for the well-being of my child due to my supposed emotional instability. She said the family member had documented specific behaviors. She said follow-up concerns had been raised. She said another meeting was already scheduled. I thanked her in a voice that barely felt like my own, then hung up before my shaking hands could betray the flood of emotion rising up inside me. The apartment felt too still, too quiet. As I paced slowly, the baby cradled against me. A fire lit deep in my chest. Not panic, not fear. Something stronger, something older, something that belonged to mothers who had guarded their children since the beginning of time. I decided then that silence was no longer my shield. Action would be. But action, in this moment, did not mean confrontation. It meant preparation. I called my own mother. Her voice cracked when she heard mine. The pain in my silence telling her the truth before I even spoke. I explained everything. Every detail. Every whisper. Every document. She did not tell me I was imagining it. She did not tell me I was being emotional. She told me I was right to be afraid. And she told me how to protect myself. Gather everything. Document everything. Do not confront her yet. Stay steady. Stay quiet. Stay ahead. Her calm guidance steadied the fire inside me, sharpening it into determination. I spent the next hours preparing for what would come next. I organized the pictures. I backed them up. I saved the voicemails. I wrote the timestamps. I noted every visit, every attempt to enter the home, every concerned message she sent. Then I hid the notebook in the bottom drawer of the kitchen, under a stack of old recipe cards she had once given me. The irony was not lost on me. By the time night came, I stood in the dim glow of the living room holding my son to my chest. His tiny hand clung to my shirt, warm and trusting. I kissed his soft head and whispered into the stillness, "I am ready now. I will not let her take you. Not while I have breath." The days that followed felt like walking through a tightening corridor. Every step forward narrowed the space around me, pressing me closer to a confrontation I did not seek but could no longer avoid. I continued to move quietly, gathering proof, keeping my distance, protecting my son with every breath. But silence can only hold back a storm for so long. Eventually, something breaks, and the break came from a place I did not expect. It was a Saturday afternoon. My husband was off work, finally able to spend an uninterrupted day with us. He held the baby in the living room, humming tunelessly, the soft vibration of his chest soothing our child. I watched them from the kitchen doorway, wondering how I would ever tell him the truth, without tearing something fragile between us. That was when the doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that sliced through the quiet. My husband looked up, surprised. I froze. The air thickened in my lungs. He said he would get it, shifting the baby into my arms, before I could protest. My heart pounded painfully as he walked toward the door. I followed a few steps behind, holding our son close, bracing myself for her face on the other side of the wood. But it was not her. It was someone worse. In a different way. A woman in a neat blouse and dark slacks, holding a clipboard and a soft leather bag. She introduced herself calmly, politely, in a tone that made my blood run cold. She was from Child Protective Services. My knees nearly buckled. I tightened my hold on the baby, feeling his warmth press into my trembling body. My husband frowned in confusion, glancing back at me with worry blooming in his eyes. The woman explained that they had received a report. A concern report. A family report. She said someone close to us had expressed alarm about my emotional stability. She said someone feared for the baby's safety. She said someone believed the environment might be unsafe for a newborn. The words floated in the air like dark feathers falling one by one, each landing with a weight that threatened to crush me. My husband's expression shifted sharply as he turned to me, confusion twisting into something else, something I could not yet name. Shock, fear, uncertainty. I felt all of it radiate from him. The woman asked if she could come inside. Her tone was gentle, but her purpose was firm. She was not here for tea. She was not here for a casual visit. She was here because someone had tried to weaponize the system against me. She was here because of her. My mother-in-law. I stepped forward before my husband could answer. My voice trembled, but my spine stayed straight. "Yes," I said. "Come in. Let her see the truth, not the story his mother had crafted." The woman entered the apartment, examining everything with careful eyes. The tidy living room, the clean kitchen, the baby's organized corner with blankets folded neatly, the crib beside our bed. She asked questions. I answered truthfully, calmly, steadily. She observed how I handled the baby, how he clung to me, how easily he settled against my heartbeat. She watched the way my husband looked at me, how he looked at the baby, the quiet love running between us even through the tension. But that tension grew when she asked the question I feared most. "Has anyone expressed concern for your mental health?" My husband looked at me. I looked at him. The truth hovered like a blade between us. I said nothing. He said nothing. Only silence. And in that silence, the woman nodded softly, as if confirming something she had suspected. She wrote notes. She studied us with eyes trained to read what words often conceal. Then she asked who might have filed the report. This time, silence did not answer. My husband spoke. His voice cracked as he said his mother's name. The woman nodded again, not surprised. She closed her binder gently and said she needed to step outside to make a quick call. My husband stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the door she had just walked through. When the latch clicked shut behind her, the dam finally broke. He turned to me. His eyes were wide, devastated, searching. "What is going on?" The words trembled from his lips. My heart ached with the weight of what I had carried alone. I took a breath so deep it scraped my ribs on the way out. I told him everything. Every whisper, every document, every attempt to enter, every manipulation, every part of the plan she had built around us like a noose. At first, he shook his head, not in disbelief of me, but in disbelief of her. His mother, the woman who raised him, the woman he trusted without question. Then anger bloomed behind his eyes, a slow burn that grew into something fierce, something protective. "How could she?" he whispered. I did not cry when I told him. My voice stayed steady, lined with exhaustion and truth. I showed him the pictures I had taken, the notes, the highlighted lines, the evidence. His hands shook as he held the phone, reading the printed words that claimed I was unfit to care for my own child. His jaw clenched, his throat tightened. He whispered something I had never heard from him before. "She has gone too far." When the woman from Child Services returned, she carried a different tone. Not suspicious, not alarmed, neutral, but kinder. She said she would close the case. She said the report appeared exaggerated and inconsistent. She said the household was safe, that the baby was well cared for, that the environment was stable. Then she asked if we needed any resources or support. I looked at my husband. He looked at me. We both shook our heads. When she left, the door closed softly behind her. But the silence that followed was not the same as before. This silence was the aftermath. The truth had stepped into the light, and now everyone could see it. My husband sank onto the couch, his elbows on his knees, his face in his hands. I sat beside him, our baby sleeping in my arms, and the weight of everything finally settled between us. He whispered into his palms. "I did not know. I did not see. I should have seen." I placed my hand gently on his back and said the words he needed most. "You see now, and we will face this together." The public consequence had arrived. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through truth revealed at the worst possible moment. And now, the storm she had created was no longer mine alone to carry. The house felt different after the visit from Child Protective Services. Not lighter. No storm disappears in a single burst of truth, but clearer, as though a fog had finally lifted and revealed the shape of the threat we were really facing. My husband sat quietly for a long time that evening, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on the floor. The baby slept curled against my chest, his tiny weight grounding me as much as it reminded me of everything we stood to lose if we faltered. My husband finally lifted his head, his eyes glassy with a grief that was not for a death, but for the breaking of an illusion. He said he could not believe his mother would go this far. He said he did not understand how the woman who raised him could turn into someone who would try to take his child through lies. He whispered her name like it was a prayer and a wound at the same time. I felt a heaviness mix with relief, a heaviness for him, because betrayal always hits the ones who trust the deepest. A relief for me, because the burden I carried alone had finally split into two halves shared now. Even if painful, we did not speak loudly. We did not argue. We did not accuse. Instead, our words came in soft, quiet waves, the kind that roll in after a storm has spent its rage. I told him everything I had held inside, every whisper she had planted, every visit that crossed boundaries, every unsettling detail I ignored because I wanted to believe she loved us the way she said she did. He listened without interrupting, his hands gripping mine more tightly each time another truth landed. He apologized, again and again, saying he should have protected us sooner. I told him not to blame himself. She had been preparing this for months, maybe longer, in ways neither of us could have imagined. When the baby stirred, letting out a tiny whimper, my husband leaned close and kissed his forehead. His voice trembled as he whispered that no one would ever take him away. Not while either of us lived. That night, we slept in the same bed, but between us lay a shared understanding that something had forever shifted. We were not just parents now. We were protectors, guardians not only of our child's well-being, but of our home, our unity, our truth. The next morning, he made a decision. He told me he needed to speak to his mother. Not gently, Not with soft excuses, but with boundaries she could not twist or step around. He said he would handle it, because this was his responsibility as much as mine. I handed him the folder of evidence. I told him he did not need to show her everything, only enough to make her stop. But he shook his head. He said he wanted her to understand the depth of what she had done. He wanted her to feel the weight of the lies she wrapped around our names. When he left that afternoon, the apartment felt strangely quiet. I moved through the rooms slowly, the baby nestled against my chest, and in the stillness I realized how much fear I had carried in my own home. Every lock I double-checked, every shadow I watched. Now, for the first time in weeks, the silence felt like space to breathe rather than space to hide. He returned later with a face that looked older, harder, as though a door inside him had closed for good. He sat down heavily, the weight of the conversation still clinging to his shoulders. He told me she denied everything at first, her voice rising in insistence that she had acted only out of concern. She cried. She begged. She claimed she loved the baby too much to stand by. But when he showed her the documents, the highlighted notes, the recorded messages, her face changed. He said the denial cracked, not because she admitted fault, but because she realized she had been caught. Her excuses grew frantic. She tried to blame stress. She tried to blame loneliness. She said she feared I could not handle motherhood. She said she wanted what was best for the child. Then she said something that made his voice falter as he repeated it to me. She said she believed the baby would be safer with her. Those words cut deeper than any lie. He told her that she would not be visiting anymore. Not unannounced. Not with keys. Not with false concern. He told her there would be no more quiet manipulations. No more reports. No more whispered doubts to doctors or neighbors or legal offices. He told her that until she sought help and acknowledged what she had done, she would not be a part of our child's life. He said she cried again, saying he was choosing me over her. He said he told her he was choosing the truth over her lies. When he finished speaking, he leaned into me and let his head rest against my shoulder. His breath shook. I rested my hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles soften slowly. It was not victory. It was not triumph. It was grief mixed with courage, healing mixed with heartbreak. But it was necessary. In the following days, the apartment began to feel like ours again. The baby grew more alert, reaching toward sunlight with open hands. I slept deeper. Not much, because newborn nights never allow that, but deeper than before. The kind of sleep that comes when fear loosens its grip. I continued documenting everything, not out of fear now, but out of wisdom. My husband changed the locks. We removed her spare key from the drawer. We placed boundaries around our lives like soft walls, visible but fair, firm but not cruel. My mother called me every evening, her voice steady as she reminded me that love can be twisted by fear, that grief can shape people into something unrecognizable. She told me I was stronger than what had tried to break me. She told me mothers have always risen from the ashes of someone else's doubts. As days turned into weeks, a quiet peace returned to our home. Not perfect, not untouched, but real. One afternoon, I sat with my son in the rocking chair, the soft creaking now a comfort rather than a trigger. I watched him reach up to touch my face with his small warm hand. His eyes were bright, curious, trusting. In that moment, the world felt full again, not because everything was fixed, but because we had survived, because truth had held, because love had not been shaken loose, and because no one, not fear, not lies, not even family, could take my child from the arms that brought him into this world. In the calm that followed the storm, I often found myself standing at the window during the quietest hours of the night, holding my son close as he breathed softly against my neck. The world outside was dark and still, but within our home, a gentle warmth had returned. Not the blissful innocence we once had, but something stronger, something refined by fire. I learned that peace is not always the absence of conflict. Sometimes, peace is simply the moment you realize you are no longer afraid. There are days when I still think of her, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant sadness. She loved him, of that I have no doubt, but love that is born from control rather than compassion can twist itself into something dangerous, something painful, something that takes rather than gives. My husband carries his own grief in quiet ways. I see it in the way his shoulders tense when his phone rings unexpectedly. I hear it in the long sighs he lets out before bed. Loss does not only come when someone leaves. Sometimes it comes when someone reveals who they truly are. But we are healing, slowly, gently, together, and every day, As I hold my son in the soft morning light, I feel myself growing into the mother I feared I could never be. Not perfect, not unshakable, but present, strong in ways I did not know I could be. The rocking chair no longer creaks with dread. It carries us both forward, one slow breath at a time. The apartment holds new memories now, sweet ones, quiet ones, ones untouched by whispered doubts. When I look at my son, I see the truth that anchored me through the darkest moments. Motherhood is not measured by how effortlessly we walk through its trials, but by how fiercely we protect the love placed in our hands. And I protected him. I protected us. And I would do it again 1,000 times over. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, I wonder something. A gentle question that I carry in my heart, like a small lantern guiding me forward. If you were standing where I stood, caught between fear and love, between betrayal and truth, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent as the walls closed in? Would you have fought back sooner? Would you have trusted your instincts the way I eventually learned to? Tell me. Because stories like mine do not live alone. They breathe through the people who hear them, who learn from them, who hold them gently in the quiet places of their minds. And if you found strength in my journey, then walk with me a little longer. Stay for the next story, and the next moment of truth, and the next lesson whispered through the soft voice of someone who has lived and survived what others only imagine.